Hey everybody, welcome to the program WRSA Radio. I am your host, Grenadier One. I got a very special guest for you guys today. A good show. I had a chance to get together with our benefactor, Jefe Honcho from the mothership, Western Rifle Shooters Association's very own Concerned American. And we did a little interview, so it's a longer show today, but I think you guys are going to enjoy it. I apologize for the audio quality. This was really a conference call type thing, so some of the audio is a little fuzzy, but I think I think you can handle it. And I've cleaned it up as well as I can, and but it's not bad. It's certainly very listenable. So, without further ado, here's the interview. Okay, we're recording. So I wanted to welcome you, Pete, to the show and ask you how you're doing. If you want to maybe give a little bit of an intro for yourself for any of the listeners who do not know who you are, I'll give you the floor.
Sure. Thanks, G. Appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you and, again, be a part of the project here at WRSA Radio. You've put a lot of work into it and you generated a lot of quality content. And I'm hoping that as this year goes on, not only can I, get an invitation back, but we can start getting the other folks into your podcast because you do a good job. I just want to say that publicly.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Sure. People know who I am. I've run the WRSA blog for longer than I'd like to count. Continue to do that as long as I continue to see some utility for that. And I think we're going to probably go into some discussions about what the future looks like. So I'll let that wait. But why don't we start with the first of your tent poles in terms of what we were talking about last year and what we think is going on now and what the future holds.
Yeah, exactly. That's that. I was going to kind of chime in there and say, yeah, what we're going to go over today is a little bit of the past, 2021 in review, a little bit of the present here for the last couple of weeks, and then what we kind of see for the immediate future, and maybe some long term. But I think. For 2021, what I kind of wanted to focus on was what were the big events for you for 2021. I have a couple, and I told them to you, and I just wanted to kind of get your take on it. Was yours different than mine, and what you thought about it?
They aren't that different. They're just in a different quadrant of big events for the year. To me, the biggest thing in 2021 was the effectiveness of the Democratic steal of the 2020 presidential election. Every time I think I'm cynical enough, every time I think I'm, judgmental enough about the goodwill of the political process here in the U.S., it usually winds up with me cursing or crying or both. 2021, when it became clear that there was going to be no effective contest in any forum, in any way, about what I don't think more than 75 million other people considered to be outright theft in multiple states in a presidential election. Hell, the bad guys took an article in Time magazine talking about how they fortified democracy by getting everybody who had some ability to drive power into the equation, to drive that power toward Trump is lying, there is no election fraud, Joe Biden was properly elected. I don't see in standard G that I don't see how we recover from that at a strategic level. Something will be left over. But the United States of America, as the country that I was born into, kind of died in 2021. And I say kind of only because there are so many people who I think in good faith can't face the utter brokenness, the utter failure of electoral safeguards. And so they're going to go vote harder in 22 and 24. We're going to really vote hard. And I think it's all a con. So that's my number one big thing. I'd like to reflect off of yours, but why don't you throw those out there?
Yeah, for me, I thought it was the Rittenhouse trial because it was a turning point for me. I felt like because of the year before, the summer of love, as they're calling it, that there was a groundswell among the left, among the Antifa, the BLM, those types, and they were really kind of feeling their oats a little bit. They're kind of feeling like they ran the street, and I think the Rittenhouse trial was a turning point for that, and it showed them that they were not completely in control of being out there and demonstrating and protesting. It made them step back and say, wait a second, we've got to consider this. We've got to think about this when we're thinking we can go out there and just do whatever we want. This guy went into a protest, and from that event, he had, if you really kind of look at each one of the separate attacks against him, there were 3-4 specific different types of assault that he used self-defense, lethal force to defend himself against, and it was all justified, and it was stamped by the court to say, yes, this was all justified. So every one of the different types of, unarmed attack, armed with an improvised weapon attack, and armed with a firearm, and he defended himself against all of those. Those are all the different ways, the different things that Antifa, those types had done to people in the past, and out there on the street. And he had it stamped and said, nope, the court is going to recognize that all of these things are wrong, and that anyone who's being faced with that has the right to lethal self-defense. And I think it was a big thing that made them stand back and at least take a different view of the fight that's going to take place out on the street. So for me, that was a huge thing, and it was also just a reminder that, yeah, we can still win a victory in the court. It may not, it may be rare. It may not be something that happens every single time, and I certainly wouldn't want to risk it. But at least we do have a fighting chance in a court with a jury. So I thought that was a pretty big event for 21. So.
And I'm tracking with what you're saying. I'm thinking that I probably should have used the sad panda icon a little bit more, because I don't think anybody in the hard left thought he would walk.
Right.
I didn't think he would walk. The one piece of good news that he had going in is he had a legitimate, I won't say anti-prosecution judge, but a judge who'd seen too much nonsense from prosecutors in prior cases. And back in a much younger day with much more hair on my head, when I was trying cases, I had to learn that just because somebody was a political liberal on the bench didn't necessarily mean that they were going to be unfair. It just meant you better have your ducks in a row when you were talking to them or talking to counsel about either some aspect of the case or the actual trial itself, because they were going to hold you to a pretty high standard. I wish I could say that we have a lot of those judges in the criminal justice system but I'm still trying to recover from my former office in Manhattan. The new DA has announced that armed robberies do not get prosecuted as a felony.
Right.
It's a larceny case now, and with that kind of craziness in the place where I learned about criminal law, I don't really know what country we're in anymore. But Kyle was extraordinarily lucky. He was extraordinarily brave, and I hope that people in the political and Second Amendment communities understand that he's the kind of guy that the door needs to always be open for, and regardless of what the ask of Mr. Rittenhouse would be,
Right.
because he is truly an American hero.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you hit on something else that was another big aspect of this, and it ties into what you were talking about before, your big piece. How far down the country has fallen. Prior to that trial, I had watched trials before on TV or listened to them, those kind of things. I had never seen that level of prosecutorial misconduct take place in the open that way. And I think that was a huge eye-opener for people that maybe still had that, law and order, America, traditional America still there, and they had that kind of belief. I think that was another thing that really opened people's eyes and said, wait a minute, everything that I thought about how the courts were supposed to work, that, if the police were after you, you must have done something wrong. And if the prosecutor files charges, you must have done something wrong. All that is out the window. It was clearly laid out for anyone who watched that trial for any period of time, and even just the highlights that, hey, guess what? Prosecutors lie, and they lie multiple times, and they stretch the rules, and they don't, follow the court's instructions. All of those things just, it just flies in the face of what people probably expected the courts to be, and I think that ties back into what you were talking about, of the country that we thought we lived in is dead.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate thing, but half joke, half piece of wisdom that I learned from one of the cops that I worked with a lot back in the day, taught me an NYPD rule, which is never put your fate into the hands of 12 people too stupid to get out of jury duty. That's pretty cynical and crass. And if that had been a Manhattan jury, I'm not sure which way it would have gone. But I can tell you that you said a mouthful when you said the government, the prosecutorial side, can and often does engage in all sorts of misconduct. And again, that's part of that lingering Greenwoodism that I think over the past couple years has been shaken for those who still, believe at least I'm an American, where at least I know I'm free, because you're not really. You're kind of at the discrimination, intentionally chosen word, the discrimination of people who are trying to use their current job to springboard into the next higher government job. And that's a bad position to be in. But
yeah, exactly.
We'll see how things go on the next type of these kind of shootings, because there will be, and frankly, it's something we've talked a little bit offline. With the state politics being what they will be during 22 here in Georgia, it is potentially a flashpoint here in Georgia, the gubernatorial race that's coming up. So.
Yeah, exactly. So what was did you have another big event for 2021?
I think the combination of your point with the Rittenhouse trial, and also just the overall, we ain't in Kansas anymore, of the electoral fraud acceptance. I don't have anything that's on an order of magnitude like that. So those were the two big ones for me.
Okay. Yeah, and then I think that kind of goes into the other one that I have, which was the turn on the COOF. I think that through the course of 2021, people really began to see, how much of a scam this is that we're going through, and it's completing some of the work that the election, the Rittenhouse, these other events that have happened that are really finally putting a nail into Greenwood, as you might say, and getting people to realize that, like you said, we're not in Kansas anymore. So I think, what are your thoughts on that, about the way the perception of the public opinion of the whole COOF situation has altered?
First off, it's clear to me, at least, that the former United States of America is already in the process of breaking apart. May not be at the political boundary level or the governmental structure level yet, but families are breaking apart over this. Friendships are breaking apart over this. Marriages, relationships are breaking apart over this, and this being, oh, you're not one of those conspiracy theorists, those anti-vaxxers. No, I just don't like having poison injected in me. That's who I am. And I think there's been enough social damage already that you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. They're going to have to be a couple of repaired, broken yet repaired Humpty Dumptys in the aftermath of this, and basically the country is going to break down when it's all over into at least 2 or 3 separate places, driven in significant part by the irreconcilability of personal politics between, let's say, a wine aunt on the Upper East Side of New York, of Manhattan, or out in San Francisco, or name any big blue city, and people living a pretty normal life here in the South. In Florida, and DeSantis are the poster child. But one of the smart things that got done in Georgia, where we both live, is that not only the passage of liability limitation for any merchant holding their place of business open to the public, a big sign, I'm sure you've seen it, that says, in essence, entry to this building is considered consent to and waiver of any claims of COVID-19 transmission against the management of this building. That is, I think, one of the things that's kept even Blue Atlanta here more sane than it would be if it were somewhere else. And certainly the countryside in Georgia, there's a lot less silliness than there would be in the countryside of Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, California, you name the big blue states. So that's one of the things that I've taken from the COOF and the vaccine, because I think that we're now even kind of past the bug itself, whether it's Delta or Omicron or moronic, or I saw some headline this morning from one of the San Francisco papers talking about there's a new variant out in the Bay Area that they probably made by banging the keyboard together with the side of their hand a little bit. But the net is what people are really beginning to bore in on is the fact that A, the vaccine doesn't prevent transmission. B, it doesn't prevent the illness. people are dog trained to say, but at least it's much better than it would have been had I not had the jabs. 3 and 4, well, I guess they're not at 4 officially yet, but certainly the new boosters, so we're at 3 and counting. And people who are thinking for themselves, saying this is not good. And the trend is even worse than not good, because if you read the scientific studies, if you're losing vaccine efficacy after 2 or 3 shots of the same crud, you're almost certainly on a path where you're going to get 4, 5, 6, etc. And you're going to be basically that whole vaccine booster as a subscription service model that might work if you were selling computer software, but it sure as hell, especially with something that is pretty much proven dangerous, even though nobody will say that, dangerous to the point of thousands of deaths. And you've got people who aren't going to take it no matter what. And some of those people may have already had their 2 first shots. I've got friends who are regretful as hell about the first 2 shots because they simply didn't know. Right. And as soon as they started to experience even mild symptoms from the shots that they've got, they're hard over on, 1, trying to figure out some way that they can at least mitigate the harm that this stuff is doing in their body already, and 2, how to prevent being required to take more of it. So we've got a lot of changes going on in the COOF front, and I don't see this ending anytime soon. Well, I don't think we're going to go the way of Australia and New Zealand, largely because I think there's some knowledge, even in the dimmest parts of government, that you got a whole lot of gunned up people across whole bunches of political lines that are pretty much tired of being told what to do by anybody about anything.
Right.
But that just means that there's going to be more of a fight, in the places where people have been disarmed. So far, anybody who still has a gun buried somewhere hasn't broken it out, at least that we know of. But we've got some exciting times here in 22 and 23, and frankly, as has always been said, America is the last place to stand. If we don't stand as Americans and as free men and women, the whole damn world goes under.
Yeah, there's nowhere to run if we go. I hear people and see people talk about that a lot. Of let's just get out. Let's just get out. Well, where are you going to go? Where are you going to run to when you see even places like people might have considered New Zealand or Australia somewhere to run to before for various reasons, but you can see now why you shouldn't do that. And even a country that looks today like it might be sane can take a turn very, very quickly into off the rails. So I think I agree with your points there about the COOF in general and the kind of change about the vaccine and everything. I have friends who've taken the vaccine. And some of them are sick now. So, my father, who had heart problems and has had heart surgery and things like that, and so they took the vaccine. My mom and dad, because of that, because they thought it will offer us some kind of protection because the higher risk factors there. But last week, my father got sick and has tested positive for. I don't know if it's the Omicron or what variant it is, but to your point about the people saying that, well, it wouldn't be as bad if I, or it would be worse if I had not taken the vaccine. He's taken the vaccine and he said it sucks really bad. So, it was like a bad flu for him, whereas For some others, it was more or less a cold, So I don't know that there's very much validity to people making that statement. I think it's more of a personal, individual, case by case basis. So yeah, interesting times, and speaking of that, that kind of leads into the next part of the discussion of more in the present, more here in the last couple of weeks, or current events going on. What's your take on the NATO Russia, to kind of jump to an international platform or international theater for a few minutes, the conflict that's brewing between Russia and NATO?
We might get to have a larger solution to the vaccine and goof being arranged by a very serious gentleman who has told the world Russia will not be invaded again, ever. And the news stories I was reading late last night indicated that Secretary of State Blinken and his gang of idiots very affirmatively and very irrevocably said that in no way will we allow Russia to, this is not a quote, but this is substantively correct, there's no way that we will allow Russia say who can and cannot be a member of NATO, which is pretty much a full rejection of at least a significant part of the ultimatum that the Russian foreign minister delivered 10 days ago.
Yeah, something like that.
And this problem that's going on in Kazakhstan, which the Russians have just sent various special operations groups, Spetsnaz, and a bunch of, I think there was a naval unit that has been dispersed there as well. But the net is the Russians are supporting their neighbors, the Kazakhstani government, against what appears to be the standard color revolution, like the original Maidan back in Ukraine in 2014, that kind of thing. I think we are playing with fire. We are playing with people who are very serious, and we are not serious at all ourselves. Even if you just start with the Secretary of Defense's essentially mandate that there is no such thing as medical exemptions and there are no such thing as religious exemptions. Everybody who's in the dot mill has to get jabbed, and combine that with what the scientists who are blowing the whistle, at least, are saying about the downstream events at 6, 12, 18, 24 months. We've got a pretty severely impaired military force already. It's going to be more severely impacted if the vaccine damage path remains what the scientists are saying it will be. And we're picking a fight with people who have hypersonic nuclear missiles. That's not a good thing.
Right.
I don't think there are any adults in the State Department or in the White House. And the problem when you're dealing with people who've never been punched in the face before, they don't understand what Mike Tyson meant when he says everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And the problem is this time the punch in the face may be coming at a really high speed. And frankly, the Russians can launch it from their own land. It's pretty dark. So I'm hoping that reasonable minds can prevail. I wish I had any faith that there were reasonable minds in the Biden administration.
Yeah, there's clearly few adults in the room. That was, something I got into in the last episode about, in under previous administrations, I would not have worried or would have worried much less about a potential conflict with these guys. Maybe they are stupid enough to try to escalate to a nuclear exchange. I don't know, or at least not smart enough to recognize that brinkmanship is a dangerous thing. I don't know. I every time I see these articles and these pieces on this situation, I just keep thinking of that that line from Hunt for Red October of this thing will get out of control and we'll be lucky to survive it. So.
Yes, unfortunately, that's not just a movie quote anymore. That appears
to
be the very succinct status quo of the situation in that particular area of the world.
Yeah, it's clear that suddenly this conflict or this fire that starts in glorious nation of Kazakhstan, is not something that is organic and it's just out of the blue, so it just has the stink of CIA all over it. And I found it interesting that the Russians clearly learned their lesson from Ukraine of don't let this thing fester. They will create this problem. It will grow. They won't let it die down. And they jumped in there and, hey, we're going to take care of this thing immediately. And they shut the internet down. And so you're getting very little information coming out. So people aren't seeing what's happening for them to, how they're crushing this. It's just very, very interesting to see, a change of tactics and the way they're dealing with this, that I'm not sure that our administration expected, and I'm interesting to see kind of what their next step is going to be. So I found it. There was something that I saw that kind of came up spontaneously, I guess, or a little bit of synchronicity, I guess, that I found very interesting. And I had found a video online about a weapons project that was thrown out there before a strategic arms talk that took place back in the late 70s, I believe. So Secretary of State had gone to the military and said, hey, we've got this arms talk that's coming up in 6 or 8 months, and I need something on the table to counter the Soviets' ability to launch nuclear missiles from mobile platforms. We're trying to limit that for them, but we don't have anything of our own to really have on the table there. So the Air Force in like 6 months conceptualized, designed, developed, and tested the ability to airdrop an ICBM, a Minuteman ICBM, out the back of a C-5 Galaxy transport plane and launch it. So it would pull out, they would deploy these cargo chutes, it would pull out on this big sled, and once it had fallen a certain distance, it would break away from the sled and launch this nuclear missile. So it turned every potential cargo flight into an ICBM platform, which was really huge. And after this arms talk, basically they just shelved that idea because it was they wanted to be very quiet about it, because not only was it a defensive weapon, it was a second strike capability. It was really a first strike capability. You could conceivably throw up a bunch of cargo planes and get them close to the Soviet Union and poof, drop out all these missiles. So they kind of shelved that. Well, very, very soon after I saw that video, I come across some articles that we just tested basically the same platform from the back of a C-130 shooting cruise missiles. So big crates full of cruise missiles fall out the back of this cargo plane and go shooting off into wherever their targets are. And I just found that very interesting that was like a repeat of the same kind of concept right before we go into these talks that we're going to have with the Russians about all of this stuff going on currently. So I don't know, it was kind of a strange coincidence or like I said, synchronicity that I thought.
Well, and I think part of it is that we want to, just as you were talking about in the first incarnation of these ideas, we didn't want to be at a negotiating table with nothing to concede or nothing to bang the table about.
Right.
The problem is now, unless everything that I read in the various English language pieces from Russia is straight up bullshit. The Russians have air launched hypersonic missiles that go Mach 5 plus, which are really hard to detect and deploy any sort of defense against. So I can see these busy little beavers in the State Department and in the ideas branch of the Department of Defense, resurrecting these things. But frankly, the fact that we're looking at using this technology to deploy more nuclear weapons against Russia.
It's insane. It's insane.
It's exactly. It's that the meme I made from the picture of Dr. Strangelove with these things happen. We left sanity a long time ago apparently, and your comment about the Admiral Painter quote is exactly on, because there's literally nothing that we can do from our perspective other than not be too surprised if the sun is suddenly rising in the north some morning, because the Russians understand what it's like to be terribly, terribly brutalized in multiple wars. The Americans have been extraordinarily lucky because of the two oceans and just a general geographic position of the United States vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And frankly, up until maybe 20 years ago, we had a pretty viable, defense establishment, at least after World War II. I don't think we have bupkis anymore. I think we are a nation state in a lot more words than deeds, and that's a bad place to be picking a fight with the Russians.
Yeah, and I think to me the big risk, because I still, and maybe it's me just being whistling past the graveyard, I still believe that there are enough adults behind the scenes that will say, look, you're talking about the end of the world. We can't go this far. I mentioned on my show last week about, when you don't fight nuclear powers straight up, you do that through proxies and covert means and those kind of things, which is, you're seeing that in glorious nation of Kazakhstan. What I get concerned about is we're doing that to the Russians through these proxies, Ukraine, Kazakhstan. What is their response going to be? Because they're not just going to sit on their hands. They're going to say, okay, well, we can fight you through proxies as well. We could be looking at some other attacks coming from someplace that we're not even expecting, and that's a huge danger. I think we could be drawn into some other Iraq, Afghanistan kind of conflict that is the final straw for us.
Yeah, it's a mess, and it will only get messier. Hopefully, there will be some level of sanity this week, because I think isn't the first meeting on Monday, something like that.
Yeah, I believe so. It is this week. I'm not sure what day it was, but 10th or 12th, something like that. But yeah. It's kind of funny that we seem to be taking the same trajectory as the Soviet Union. You get this technology sort of imbalance between Star Wars and the Russians, which was more probably built up more than it really was a factor. But and so now we're maybe behind the ball from a technology standpoint. So we're trying to keep pace with the Russians. You get the Russians getting drained in Afghanistan. Now we've been drained from Afghanistan, and then it leads to the breakup of the Soviet Union. You have to kind of wonder, is this what leads to the breakup of the United States? So very interesting situation. So let's jump to something a little bit more close to us, and I think it'll lead us into our future endeavors. What do you think about the Patriot Front guys?
I think there's a knee-jerk reaction amongst most of the loud voices in our part of the political sphere, scoffing at street demonstrations and scoffing at organizations because they're clearly glowies and blah, 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 blah. The short answer, G, is that I don't know. I don't know what I think about them. I think from what little presence that they've had on Gab, they seem to have a good communications shop in that they keep their messages tight. They demonstrate doing actual things in the street, and there are a couple other people that are doing this kind of thing as well. But putting up what I think of as proof of life propaganda stickers and that kind of thing on lampposts and that kind of thing, I honestly don't know, because frankly, and this is where those loud voices I was mentioning before are definitely correct. There have been several organizations, of late that have been pretty well discredited by their own actions, and I think one should be careful in associating with any large group of people where you don't know everybody and everybody doesn't know you. But I think the idea that everybody should just huddle around their computers, nobody's saying this, so let me just acknowledge the use of hyperbole here. But the idea that patriotic Americans should just huddle around their handheld phones, or around if they're really a boomer, around their laptops, and monitor things, and then at some point, Jock has a long mustache will come over the traffic, and then we'll know that's the time we go ahead and become French resistance people in the US of A. I don't see how that's going to work either. So I'll call Patriot Front jury's still out, largely because I have more ignorance than knowledge about them.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I tend to agree with that. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to the interview from that their leader gave. What is his name? Robert Rousseau, something like that.
Yes.
On Just Joe Radio the other day.
I did not hear that. Is that something that your listeners should be searching out, including myself, obviously?
Absolutely. That was what I was going to suggest. Is I think, and maybe if you get a chance, go grab the link and put it on the mothership, because I think it was a exceptional interview, and it really answered a lot of questions that some of these people have thrown out there. And he, he gave really good responses to all of those accusations and all of those things that people have lobbed at them, including, I had seen this kind of absurd thing about, they're carrying these shields, and those shields they're on back order. They take months to buy because they're made in some special factory or some shit like that. And then they show a video where they made the shields. Okay. They weren't something that they had purchased. They made them. So and that to me just kind of demonstrated the absurdity that people go into in order to kind of convince themselves to not do something. I think we really suffer from that in our community. Everyone is looking for an excuse to not do something, and so they reach for the most outlandish and absurd reasons and ideas to sort of justify or provide them that escape. Even to the point of this is this great massive secret cabal behind everything, and they're so omnipotent and omnipresent that I'm useless and I can't fight that and I can't stop it. You can't be that way. You can't take that position that everything is a fed op and everything is a false flag and everybody's controlled opposition. I mean, if that's the case, then we just need to give up because we're all compromised and there's no hope for us.
Yeah, it gets back to the old Gretzky quote about you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the thing. It's if it is correct, and I think it is, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is correct. But if it is correct that the country is already in the process of breaking apart, then people had better start figuring out what they want their part of the broken apart country to be. Because in candor, I don't want any democracy crap. I'm really tired of democracy. I am really tired of pinheads each having the electoral power that people who pay attention and are educated in the issues have the same electoral power there. My vote being canceled by somebody who may not even be legitimately in this country, basta with democracy. And I also, frankly, don't want to see very much of a central government because I don't see what a central government is good for. It gets back to our discussions about NATO and the U.S. and Russia. You know what the central government is doing right now? They're destroying the currency by money supply expansion beyond anything rational. Okay, well, we don't need them doing that. Thank you very much. We're poking the bear in the chest with their fingers, stiff fingering them in the chest to a bunch of people who said, don't do that. We don't need them doing that. They can't run an election, clearly. What am I getting out of this place in Washington?
Exactly.
So I throw these ideas out because even for someone who believes that the best choice for themselves and their family is to maintain a low profile, monitor the various information feeds, and hold tight till, it's the magic 8 ball, right? Ask again later. Till the right face of the 8 ball comes up. Okay, that's a path, but what are you going to do about the fact that there are a whole bunch of people, mostly totalitarians, that are figuring out how to make what used to be the United States of America into essentially a large open air prison run by vax passports on your cell phone that you'll have to carry. And even more ominously, the complete elimination of cash so that every bit of economic activity will be tracked by that same mechanism that's quote unquote keeping track of your vaccine safety for yourself and everybody else, with sneer quotes going wildly in the air here. That's because people are thinking about that, and I think I'll close with a quote from the Pfizer VP that's been so helpful in getting us to understand what exactly is going on. It's a fairly dark close, but I think we're all adults here. We can live with that. But the option of opting out and staying in the basement is not really a viable option, especially if one spouse or one's kids or one's in-laws are on the other side of all of these questions, and you've already been marked by those so-called family members as a possible bad thinker for delivery to the secret police when that is appropriate. We're not going to be able to sit this one out. No one is going to be able to sit this one out. And I think the sooner, as I said in my interview with TL a week, 10 days ago, something like that, if I had one thing to tell people, it would be embrace the horror, because we are not voting our way out of this. We are not hiding our way out of this. We are not getting through this except by going through it. And by going through it is going to mean some level of fighting. It's going to mean some level of activism. It's going to mean some level of very serious risk, not only to your health, but to your station in life. And if people are still wrestling with that, and I know a lot of people are, that's a good place to be wrestling. Just remember, there's no getting away from what we're in.
Right.
That's a really long response to your question, but
no, that's totally fine. It's totally fine. For me, I think playing off of that, touching on that, we're not going to get out of this without a fight. You have laid that out very clear many times, and I love your quote that you put on the page all the time. And to that point, we have to have allies. We may not all be on the same page politically about what we think the aftermath should look like, or after the change, after the fight, whatever. But we can kind of hash that out after the fact. I said something to someone on Gab yesterday. These guys, these kind of nationalist types were saying, boomers, these traditional conservatives, they're going to be a problem, and so on and so forth. And I said, well, the thing that you have to consider is that they outnumber you 2 or 3, if not more, to 1, and they're just as armed as you are. And you're just going to have to realize that you may not get everything that you want in the initial fight. And that's assuming that we win, right? You may not get everything that you want, and you're going to have to realize that these people are going to still need to be your allies, and you need to learn to work together with them, and we can hash it out after the fact, after it's all over. I think that goes for, the same for traditional conservative types looking at somebody like Patriot Front, or looking back across the aisle at those nationalist types, to say, look, we may not agree politically, but like you said, we're not getting out of this. We're not going to vote our way out of this. There's going to be a fight. Let's win, and then we'll figure it out afterwards. And maybe that means that, we've got to carve out places for one another. That we're not. You go run this area the way you want to run it, and we're going to run this area, and everybody will be happy going forward. But those people are going to they're on our side, whether we like everything about them or not,
And that's ultimately the lens through which we should be looking at the coming years. Does this person want to kill me for my beliefs? Because I can tell you, there are people in the U.S. government that want to do it, quite a few of them. There are a lot of supporters of the U.S. government. Think the Acela Corder, New York Times, WAPO, Los Angeles Times reading, bunch of chowderheads. There are a whole lot of people in this country that would not mind with one iota if everybody who listens to this podcast, if everybody who reads our respective work online, if everybody associated with this side of the political spectrum were at the very least in a concentration camp for re-education. That's just the reality of where we are in this country in early 2022. If you don't think that's going to need to be resolved on a piece-by-piece basis, and thus the demise of the former USA as a single governmental institution, that's a pre-assumption going in, because those people are going to want to have their way. Other folks elsewhere on the political spectrum are going to want to have things their way. And we've already shown that we can't live under a set of rules that say these things are prohibited, these things are permitted, and live peacefully amongst each other. We've already proven we can't do that, because right now the whole issue of the 2020 election was, my God, this guy Trump is insane. We have to stop him by any means necessary. Once you throw an election in a country the size of the United States and you do it successfully, it's time for a reset of the whole machine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you see, this was the deep state bringing its tactics home, and we look at third world shitholes as people call them, and we say, well, why are these countries like that? And there's a lot of different reasons, but many of them are like that because of the meddling of our deep state. And so, what do people think is going to happen when they bring those very same tactics back home and begin to apply them to the our civilian population here? It's the same kind of thing. We're going to turn into a massive shithole.
Yeah, and I think massive shithole is one of the for sure predictions for the flaming 20s.
Exactly.
There will be some areas. But it might be a good title for a collection of essays too. but there are going to be some places that are peaceful, and there are going to be some places that will be hell on earth. And that's why you've seen, anybody who reads our stuff has seen the evolving map of the former Yugoslavia. There were places in the north where things were reasonably civilized. There were places further south in the former Yugoslavia where you had a three-way dance of death, and it was just horrible.
Right.
That's coming to the U.S. And especially after it is clear after the next two federal elections, 22 and 24, that it really is no longer a viable electoral process. It's big times, as we mentioned earlier in the show, and we're going to have to embrace the horror. We're going to have to face it head on, lest we be run over by it.
Right, right. So that kind of leads to the next, the end topic of what about the future? What do we do about these things? And I know you and I have talked about some ideas and sort of tentative plans for the immediate time frame in front of us, how we go about and how others might go about uh, getting themselves ready for this and dealing with what's coming down the pipe. Uh, let's talk a little bit about that. So we had talked about building small, starting small, and building some kind of cohesion, very much in the model of these Patriot Front guys. Of I look at them and yeah, they've, even if you remove the sort of political element from it, just the idea of like-minded people getting together to train and exercise and go out and maybe do some sort of activism type thing is totally a great idea, totally viable, and something that we should be trying to emulate at a much smaller local level. What's your thoughts on that?
I get back in a planning sense to the extremely local setting of, can I defend my own sleeping space? And if not, can I come up with a plan to do that that's reality based, or do I have to get a new sleeping space, new living space? One of the more critical facts that more Americans need to get through their brains is, when shit is going sideways, 911 is not going to work. It's not going to work for a couple reasons. Maybe because it's already been taken out as part of an infrastructure strike. Maybe it's because there simply are no units available to be dispatched. We've talked before about it during the summer of 20, when New York was becoming a free fire commercial fireworks zone. And people that I know personally tried to dial 911, and they got, for the entire city of New York was getting a recording for 911. It's unbelievable, but that's the future. That's what the future looks like. So can I defend my sleeping space, my living space? If not, can I make it so, or do I have to move? If I have to move, where am I going to move to? Because ultimately, one guy or a couple, they're not going to be able to do very much about holding on to their property, their land, their safety, if there is no law enforcement available. We have to assume there will not be any law enforcement available. So I think the first thing that people should be thinking about is a good cold-eyed look at, is my situation viable? And then making whatever changes possible there. I think the idea of getting together quietly with people who come in, known to the others. I'd rather have a small group known to each other than a larger group with a bunch of strangers in it, because I think strangers are a security problem at this point. But the end state should be helping one's community remain safe in the light of what's coming. And we joke about the roof Koreans, but anybody I've ever known who's telling a roof Korean story is saying, at least subconsciously, these guys really had it together, because they took care of their community in the face of abandonment by the LA area police and pretty serious rioting, and they held their ground. Other areas that didn't do that had that ground burned to the ground. That's what we should be thinking about. How do we do that, and how do we encourage other people to do that? And I think that's where we start. I think the Jack Lawson books are great as a recruiting tool. Once you can get people in your immediate area to understand that 911 will not be working. Now, what are you going to do? Anyways, those are some thoughts.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think your observation about the rooftop Koreans, we're still gonna have to get us some T-shirts that say "Rooftop Ready," and I think we need some patches because I think it's a fantastic slogan and it's a good mindset, and
yes,
because
of everything that you said. I think you could make it a rocker patch, and it wouldn't cost very much either.
Yeah. So that's something I think we need to work on.
But it's interesting, as I understand it, there was utilization, albeit for probably a different purpose that anyone conceived of before the riots. But my understanding is that there were community groups in the Korean community that had the ability of, like, go back to the 80s, right? A transformation, right? They were transformers, and all of a sudden they went from, fair treatment of the Koreans to, we are going to go to our rooftops and protect our community. And I think that's another opportunity where if there is an existing mechanism in your neighborhood, or you can create an existing mechanism that it can be as simple as a CERT program, the CERT. And I know it's DHS and FEMA, and I know all that stuff, but there's that old line about status and cover and all that stuff. I think the most palatable thing that people can see that they would want to have something to do with, because I'm not carrying a gun in the street. That's crazy talk. But would you learn how to run a generator? Would you learn how to do self-care and buddy care in the IFAC sense? Would you learn how to purify water and basic sanitation stuff? Because again, if this goes as badly as I think it will go, and I'm talking more about the race and I'll call it ethnic and race issues that will be fueling violence. We're not even talking about the downstream of the vaccine and all of its implementation paraphernalia. But you're going to have clean water. You're going to have some way of getting rid of unclean water and waste appropriately. There's a bunch of stuff that people can do that have nothing to do with guns per se, but I would not be surprised that most of the people looking for those skills would also be looking for, at least basic safety and basic marksmanship stuff when it comes to shooting.
Right.
So,
yeah, I would advise. I think your point of community groups with the Koreans. I know the Korean church is pretty strong.
yes.
Those are fairly strong knit communities, and I think a lot of their organization is around those churches, and I think that's something that could be emulated in our own communities, in our own churches. People could begin to build these kinds of groups, among those fellow parishioners in their church. And I think started off just with those simple things like you're talking about, the basic preparedness, basic readiness stuff, and even basic fitness. I think we all could probably lose 20 pounds, and if some of us if not more. So I think having, fitness should be something that we should all be working towards, being prepared across multiple other areas. So, and those things kind of keep you out of trouble too. And it lets you kind of go through and learn those people, learn to know those people and vet those people. So to your point about strangers in your side of the wire, if you've got a church group or a group of friends or something like that, it's a good way to kind of figure out who's serious about these things. If they're willing to come out and go on a nature hike for 4 or 5 miles and do that on a consistent basis, then they may be willing to do some more things, and you just slowly kind of work more activities and more skill sets into the mix. But you have to be willing to take those steps yourself and be your own leader. That was something that came out in the Patriot Front interview with Rousseau. Was he was talking about, they were trying to build the leaders that were going to be around when things went south. And I think that's something that you and I have discussed many times. We've talked about it on in our own conversations. You've talked about it on the website. I've talked about it on the show. Is we're our own leaders, and we're the people that we were looking for to solve these problems. So I think it's up to us to build those groups and start small. Just start local with a group of people that we know, or we have some history with, and just start out doing those simple things like going on a ruck march. What's
Yep.
your thoughts on that? Yeah.
No, I think it's great. And, just speaking about ruck marches, what's the name of the organization? Is it Go Ruck or something like that? But
Yeah, Go Ruck. Yeah.
They've got, and they're pretty aggressive with their mileages, but, the way you work with very little resources is you graft yourself onto people who exist and have at least similarity of mission within that segment that you're working on today. You don't have to set up your own shooting range, go to somebody else's shooting range. If Go Ruck is having a 10K training march for one of their events later on in the year, because I think that's how they do it, is they have a couple building up sequences, and then you go out and do your 25 miles in one day or whatever the culmination exercise is. But we use other people's infrastructure appropriately and cooperatively, all those good Boy Scout words. But the reality is we can't possibly build the infrastructure that we need. That's why I mentioned CERT. If for nothing else, then you can find out who the people who are going to be helpful and who are the people who, even though they should be being helpful, they're more stuck on process and procedure. And, you can't do that because, well, that's great. I think there's a lot more painful education coming along in the next couple of years. By education, I mean people who never thought they'd be living in a place threatened by a riot wind up in the middle of a riot. And if they're lucky and they and their families survive, they're going to be more open toward that kind of collaborative self-defense type of thing that ultimately you're going to see, simply because these people were talking about defund the police. They're actually successful in getting that done. Defund the police, eviscerate the criminal justice system. The bad guys are being empowered and the good guys are being disenfranchised. That's a bad forecast for the next couple of years, but that's what my Magic 8 Ball says.
Yeah, no, I concur. I know you wanted to touch on the quote from and the article from the Pfizer guy. So why don't we kind of transition a little bit into that to kind of push things out a little bit more to give some people some things to think about going forward.
Sure, and this is a quote in a post that both G and I will have up on our respective places. But it's from Mike Yeadon, He was a Pfizer VP who was involved in a lot of vaccine research. He was one of the first guys to come out of big pharma and say, this is all bad. This is all terribly bad. It's more bad than I can describe. And it opens with kind of a somber note, but just like Admiral Stockdale's quote requires us to do, we have to face the harsh realities of what is really in front of us if we're to have any chance of succeeding. So Dr. Yaden begins, this is a note he wrote on January 7th. It's been over a year since I fell to the floor in the middle of the night when it finally hit me what we were facing. I sobbed like a baby. Not since. I've been far too angry for that. Nothing has happened to lessen the clear sense of where this is going. Totalitarian control through imposed vax pass, global financial reset, withdrawal of cash along with the last vestiges of privacy, swap sovereign currencies for CBDCs, all linked to the vax pass, aka digital ID. Every move through a regulated threshold could be even from leaving your own home, and every financial transaction checked by VaxPass interacting with a huge digital infrastructure, one for every living being. Repeated vaccination to requalify your VaxPass and the opportunity for the perpetrators to thin the herd through administration of lethal materials they can administer at any time they want. A technological tyranny as permanent as Huxley warned, deepening and unremovable. If VaxPass is installed for anything, no matter how inconsequential, it'll spread like a metastasizing cancer until everything is under their control. Could we stop it? Sure, if enough people wake up. Will they wake up? Hard to believe they will, isn't it? And I want to talk about what do you do when you get that somber report. The reality is what the powers that be are doing, attempting to do, has never been tried before. The narrative is already breaking down. The more 13-year-old boys and girls who are falling over with heart attacks 2 or 3 days after their second shot, the more sports figures that are dying on the field, the more people in your own families that are getting vaccine injuries or worse. They can't win on the narratives. So what they have to do is shut down the means of communication for those who are attacking their narrative of safe, efficient, and proper for boosters to the infinite horizon. We have the ability to change human history if we're willing to fight. Fight with our fingertips on a keyboard, fight with our vocal cords in public presentations, fight, if necessary, with arms. But we have the ability, whether we choose to use it or not, but we have the ability to change human history. The bad people have their plan. It's a large-scale extermination event. It's in process as we speak. It's going to be up to each and every one of us to respond to that horrific, almost unimaginable plan. And I would hope the listeners take a look at not only the Yaden quote that I just read you, but the rest of the information and run it out in your minds 6, 12, 18 months. We're in a very short window of time. And we'd better start being willing to go outside of our comfort levels. Because once they get this electronic infrastructure built around us, it's going to be really hard to get rid of. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I anytime, the floor is open. Anytime you want to come on the show, and you've got you've got the time, I'll make the time, and we'll do this again. So I appreciate you coming. I think the listeners appreciate you coming. I hate to leave everybody with such a somber idea, but so what I will say is this is, to me, this really speaks to the quote from, or the speech from Rudolf Steiner, where he talks about preparing for Ahriman. Ahriman is his sort of antichrist type figure, and he says that there's nothing that we can do about the coming of Ahriman. That's happening. It's going to happen. What we can do is we can prepare for it and be cognizant of it and aware of it and smart enough to reject it and to fight it. And I think that is something that we to your point of, we all have to be ready and aware and knowledgeable and smart about these things that are happening, and watch them and be prepared to fight them. So thanks, Concerned American, for coming on the show. I appreciate it. And we'll see you again sometime.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so there you have it. I want to thank Concerned American for coming on the show again. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I certainly did. I always enjoy sitting down with Pete and having a conversation. Anyway, I want to thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe. Come see us over on Gab and the Mothership, and I will see you on the next episode.